Good morning, everyone. Earlier this week, I was going for a run, and I have a playlist that I created for my runs, which is mostly chanting music, some Krishna Das, some chanting from the CDs that we have on this path, things that have just a little bit of rajas in them to keep me going when I'm starting to get tired. And I really enjoy running to this playlist. But for some reason on Monday of this week, today is Friday, so just a few days ago, I chose a playlist that I had created years ago. It was called Running Playlist, and I think maybe I just felt like I needed a little more energy or something, but something in me drove me to choose this playlist that I'd made maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And it was songs that I haven't heard in a very long time, really rajasic music, not the type of music that I'm used to listening to now, currently. And what I found, it definitely kept me motivated on my run, but what I found is that over this past week, since listening to that music Monday morning, I cannot get these songs out of my head. They are popping up everywhere, right when I wake up in the morning, when I'm doing some sort of menial task, like cleaning my house or cooking dinner. There I am. The song is just waiting for me. In my meditations, they're sneaking in and popping up. And I found that, no matter what I could do, I couldn't get these songs out of my head. I was stuck on replay with these songs over and over again, just always peeking up at inopportune moments. And I found even when I was trying to sing chants in my mind or repeat japa or repeat whispers from eternity that I had memorized, anything that I could do to shift my consciousness back to just keep these little they were like little fairies, little, mischievous pixies that were just kind of popping up in my mind all over the place. No matter what I could do, what I tried to do to change that song that was stuck on replay in my mind, there it was, day after day, just popping in. And it made me think about the power of habit. This is music that's getting ingrained or imprinted into the grooves of our consciousness, and it's there. And I was able, after listening to one song, that I hadn't heard in 7 years, there it was on replay over and over and over again, and I was stuck in that groove. And I found that no matter how hard I tried to pull my energy up to shift my consciousness and regroove that, it just still kept popping in. And this is the way that habits work in our lives. We get stuck on replay, just like this song was stuck on replay in my mind. We get stuck on replay in the habit patterns that our subconscious mind fall into. And Paramahansa Yogananda teaches us that our habits are fighting on a battlefield of our consciousness. They're constantly pulling us in different directions. And that sometimes these, what we would call bad habits, and by bad habits, we mean anything that's pulling our energy down and out into the world, anything that's affirming our separateness from God, that often bad habits can have a stronger hold on us than our good habits. This is what I was recognizing, that as soon as that song would pop into my head and I would say no and start singing a chant, there it was the next day or the next hour when my subconscious mind fell back into some of its patterns. It was there, and it took a lot of energy. I feel like now we're on day 5, and still this morning it was there, but I'm quickly, over the course, I'm really working to reroute that and dig those songs out of my mind. But what I was finding is that it was taking so much energy to uproot some of those negative, if we want to call them that, those bad habit patterns, or in this case, that song, and replace it with something that was God-affirming and that was uplifting. And of course, that's the case because that's the nature of our universe. That's the nature of our world. Energy comes in and it wants to take us down and out into the sensory relationship. We want to find happiness out in the world. And so that energy comes in and it's drawing us out somewhere. And what we're trying to do is pull that energy back and in and up. And the same thing happens with our patterns, our habit patterns, which is why Yogananda can say that sometimes those bad habits, again, anything that's pulling us down into the world, that's affirming our separateness from God, they can be more difficult to to replace some of those negative habits at times, because that's the nature of the world, drawing us down and out. And as spiritual seekers and yogis, what we're doing is trying to affirm our true definition as children of God. We're trying to affirm our reality by living consciously and superconsciously, not falling into those subconscious patterns. And I was thinking about the way that that relates to our world right now. You know, it's May of 2020, and here we are in the middle of this global pandemic. And especially for those of us that live in urban settings, our lives have changed drastically over the course of the last couple of months. And for a lot of us, the things that we were used to doing, sometimes on a daily or on a weekly basis, they were just taken away. Excuse me. In a matter of hours for a lot of people. I know for me, in my professional life, I'm a high school English teacher, and in a matter of 90 minutes, we had shifted our entire world. This was on Friday, March 13th. We shifted our entire world, and we weren't coming back to school for what we thought was a few weeks, but what ended up being the rest of the school year. There are a lot of habit patterns that needed to be changed in that moment, a lot of things that we were used to doing in a certain way that automatically were shifted. And when I think about what that looks like for each one of us in these, especially those of us, as I said, in urban settings, it can feel like a loss when we are being asked to live differently and to make different choices, or sometimes being forced to make different choices. You know, I was talking with a friend the other day who was saying that she and her partner, they used to go out every Friday for dinner. That was just what they did, that he would meet her after work and they would go and have a little date night, and it was what brought them together. It was what grounded their relationship. It was something that was really special to them, and that's gone now because they're not going out and eating. And she was talking about feeling the disappointment in that. Or, you know, if you are a parent and you have a little child and you love taking them to the store with you and saying, all right, why don't you pick out one toy? That's something my dad used to do with my sister and I when we were young. So I don't know if parents still do that, but this idea of just these little habit patterns and traditions that can fall into our lives that have been uprooted. And what we can find is that there's disappointment there. You know, oh, I can't go out and have a date night with my partner once a week anymore. I can't take my child to the toy store to buy him or her a toy when they're to reward them for something or to show them that I care. All of a sudden, these patterns in our lives that we're used to, that have become habituated, have completely shifted, and many of them have stopped. And what I found in speaking with my friend about mourning the loss of her date night with her partner is that these realities that we're, that these circumstances where we're looking at disappointment or regret or frustration, how much of that is actually dependent on our emotional state, and how much of that is habituated? How much of that is a pattern? So how much of my friend's relationship was actually rooted in those Friday night date night dinners? How much of their happiness, of their togetherness, of their partnership was defined by going to dinner every Friday night? I'd venture to say very little, that their relationship was grounded on so much more, and this was a habit that they'd fallen into. A lovely one, time spent together, time focused on one another. But taking that habit away doesn't mean that they lose the essential elements of what grounded their relationship. It doesn't mean that they've lost the love, the compassion, the respect, the companionship that was there. It was simply a habit that needed to be shifted. In their case, that was forced upon them to be shifted because they couldn't go out anymore. And this is what Yogananda teaches each one of us. We have the opportunity to look at every circumstance in our life and determine, especially when we're dealing with contemplating whether it's a positive or a negative thing in our lives, whether we're attaching our likes or our dislikes to it, we have that opportunity to look at how much of this activity, how much of this thought pattern, how much of this reality is habituated, how much of this is rooted in my subconscious. Because if it's a habit, then we have an opportunity to change it and to transform it. Habits can always be shifted by bringing in energy and concentration. It comes back to how conscious we choose to be in that moment. Yogananda says to us that with quick, alert attention, we can dissolve negative habits. And he goes on to say that attention is the needle that cuts the grooves in the records of our memory. That if we want to reactivate or redefine a habit pattern in our lives, all we need to do is bring conscious attention and awareness to what it is that we want to change. And that bringing that concentration and that awareness, that alertness, that energy, these are all spiritual qualities, spiritual attributes that we can bring in. And by focusing on that, automatically what we've defined is that the divine is with us, that the divine is working in cahoots with us. We're no longer alone. We have a partnership there that's helping to uplift us, that's supplying us with an endless, limitless supply of energy and grace, as long as we can tune in and tap into that quality. And so as we're living in a time when our habit patterns, we're forced to look at our habit patterns because things are being taken away, the question that we get to ask ourselves, the great opportunity that we have in this moment, is to say, where does my consciousness lie? How much of my life that is defined by my likes and dislikes is actually a habit pattern that I now have an opportunity to give my full attention to? And when I'm giving that full attention to it, am I inviting the divine in? Am I bringing God with me into those moments? A few years ago, I read a book that was called If the Buddha Came to Dinner. And it was written by a nutritionist who was very successful in the world and who herself had a spiritual practice grounded in Buddhism. And so she, excuse me, she called her company or her business Transformational Nutrition. She called herself a transformational nutritionist, which is really a beautiful and lovely thing to think about. Again, this idea of transforming from the inside out. It's not about simply replacing a habit, but it's about transforming the energy. And the reason she called her book If the Buddha Came to Dinner is because what she found worked really well with her clients who were coming to her with the purpose of wanting to change their eating habits, right? She was a nutritionist, so people were coming, whether it was to lose weight or to gain weight or, to change their eating habits to be healthier for their lifestyle choice. Everyone was coming there to break habits that they had formed and developed over their lives. And what she said to them is, imagine that every single meal that you are eating, every single snack that you are eating, you're cooking for the Buddha. Or again, fill in the blank. The Buddha can be anyone, any divine energy that you can bring into that element. This is what she was saying. So imagine that you're cooking for the Buddha. What would you serve him? How would you cook that food? How would you eat that food? Would you serve him? She uses the image. Would you open a bag of Cheetos and dump them into a bowl and put them on the table and start crunching away while you're watching television? No. You would cook a beautiful meal, sit it down on the table, turn off all other distractions, and be present with the Buddha. Bring that consciousness into the activity, the consciousness of the divine. And what she found throughout her career is that people could take this element, could take this activity of spiritualizing what they were doing, again, in whatever form that came, whether it was actually inviting the Buddha to dinner or whatever spiritualizing meant, that element of spiritualizing it meant to them. But that by bringing their conscious attention and focus and awareness to it, they were able to make transformational changes to habit patterns that were blocking them. They were able to free their energy to serve them in different ways. And this is the opportunity, as I said, that each one of us has every day in our lives. On Wednesday night, a few of us were here for a series that we've been doing called Superconscious Tools for Troubled Times. And this week we were talking about right attitude, which was really a fun and wonderful topic. And one of the things that my friend said when he was up here speaking was the idea that the world is not linear in the sense that our energy is always going up and then starkly always going down, and today it's up and tomorrow it's down, that everything is an ebb and a flow, that it's a dance. habits that we're constantly being drawn out into the world and then being pushed back in and reminded, oh yes, let's raise our energy to God. And then something else draws us out into the world. Maybe we forget our habit of good eating and we snack on something we shouldn't. Okay, well, let's bring our energy back in and change our mind for dinner and rewrite that habit, regroove those activities. And what Yogananda tells us as he writes about breaking negative habits in our lives, it comes back to our attention and our awareness, because our habits are so subtle. We can look at them as these grosser material actions, like going on a date night with your partner or taking your child to a toy store or whatever it may be that in this time of shelter in place has been lost. But it can also be our emotions, our attitudes. Do I have a proclivity towards negativity and pessimism or towards optimism? Do I have a habit towards fatigue or towards energy? All of these things are habits. And if we forget that we have control over them, then our habits run us. Our subconscious mind gets to run the show. But by bringing our attention and our awareness, excuse me, and inviting the divine into our practice of everything that we're doing in our lives, we're helping to streamline that energy. We're helping to streamline that focus and that attention, and to bring those gifts of the divine, grace, energy, joy, into our daily habits. And we work and live more in the conscious and superconscious mind, which of course roots everything back into meditation. What Yogananda teaches us about uprooting negative habits is that it's not about picking them up root by root and using force and going out into the world and just grabbing each one of them and using our force and our energy and our violence to just destroy negative habits. It's about cultivating positive habits. It's about God communion through meditation. It's about magnetizing our energy at the spiritual eye. Because as we're doing that, as we're allowing energy to flow through us, then what we're doing is we're growing stronger and stronger in our positive habits, and suddenly these negative habits seem to fall away. They're washed up in that energy that's flowing up towards expansion and up towards joy. A parable from the Bible, from the book of Matthew, that Yogananda uses to describe this exact scenario is the parable of the wheat and the tares. And in this story, there is a farmer who goes out into his field and sows the seeds for the harvest, for his harvest of wheat. And in the parable, in the night, his enemy comes and sows seeds of tares. Tares are weeds. And so he's planted his field, and in the night, the enemy comes and sows all of these seeds of weeds that are going to grow in the fields along with the wheat that he has grown. And when the wheat finally comes, when it begins to sprout and it's there, what the farmer and his farmhands find is that the wheat is being grown alongside all of these weeds and tares. And his farmhand says to him, should we pull all of the weeds? Should we pull the tares? And the farmer says, no, let them grow to maturity along with the wheat, for fear that if we pull out each of these weeds, we'll take the good wheat along with it, because the roots are being intertwined as they're growing together. And he says, but when everything has come to maturity and it's time for harvest, we'll pull them up together, bundle the tares together and burn them, and bring the wheat into my barn. Yogananda talks about this parable and how it relates to each one of us. That enemy that comes in the night and sows the seeds of tares, those weeds of bad habits, is our subconscious mind. It's stuck in those grooves. And whenever we fall into autopilot, we become, what Yogananda says, we become a slave to our habits. Versus when we can bring our energy and our attentions, our conscious mind and our superconscious mind, the farmer sowing the seeds of wheat, the wheat representative of that, then what we're doing is we are owning our own power over all of our habit patterns, and we can release ourselves from those patterns that are constantly tethering us to the material world, to our sensory, to our relationship to the world in a sensory way. And so as the good habits, the wheats, are maturing, when they're finally come to maturity, when we come to that place of God ecstasy, those moments of God communion, then we can pull up those good habits, and the weeds, the tars, the bad habits come with them, and we can cast them aside. But if we try and pull them up together, if we try and focus too much on only our negative habits, what happens is we can lose sight of those good habits. Everything is about the flow of energy. Continue to cultivate our good habits. Continue to encourage energy to flow in and up, magnetizing the spiritual eye. And as we practice these good habits, what we find is that our communion with God becomes stronger and stronger. And these negative habits, these little things that keep us tethered to our likes and dislikes, they slowly begin to fall away. All of this comes back to meditation. Allow the ebb and the flow of the world to be what it is. But always remember, as the flow is moving us out, as the tide is pulling us out into the world, the inevitable ebb will come back in, and we can take that energy and raise it up and offer it to the divine. Don't worry about every little ebb and flow in and out. Concentrate always on divine communion, on divine love, on divine inspiration. And what we'll find is these habits transform us from the inside out, and suddenly we're living for God alone.